Hollywood told you he burned in the sunlight. They told you he drank blood from the necks of beautiful women in a secluded Gothic castle. But the real Dracula did not hide in the shadows of fiction. He walked among us, breathed our air, and his cruelty was so absolute that even the dirt beneath his feet was permanently stained with the blood of thousands of innocent souls. He was Vlad Tepes, the Impaler. To the Western world, he is a terrifying legend, a myth used to scare children in the dark. But to the people of the 15th century, he was a living, breathing nightmare. His methods of torture were so graphic, so systematically sadistic, that they altered the course of European history forever. Imagine marching with an army into a dark, foggy valley, expecting a battle, only to find a massive landscape made not of trees but of sharpened wooden stakes. And on every single stake a human body rotting under the blazing sun. Infants next to their mothers. Brave soldiers reduced to crow food, their faces frozen in a final agonizing scream. This was Vlad's masterpiece, known in history as the Forest of the Impaled. It was not just an act of violence. It was a carefully calculated psychological weapon designed to paralyze the world's greatest empire with pure, unadulterated terror. Every king in Europe trembled at the mere mention of his name. Popes prayed for salvation in their cathedrals, believing judgment day had finally come upon mankind. Vlad believed no mortal man could ever cross his forest of death. But he forgot one crucial thing. He was not fighting ordinary men. He was dealing with the Ottoman Empire, and the leader of that empire, Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror, possessed an army of warriors who did not know how to fear. These were men history would remember as the wildest, most fearless fighters of their time, the Crazy Turks. To truly understand the depth of this brutal clash, we must travel back in time to where it all began, long before the rivers ran red with blood. We must go to the Royal Ottoman court in Edirne, long before they became mortal enemies trapped in a dance of death. Vlad and Sultan Mehmed grew up in the exact same palace, sharing the same halls. Vlad was sent to the Ottomans as a young political hostage by his own father, the ruler of Wallachia, to guarantee loyalty to the Sultan. For years, Vlad studied alongside the young Prince Mehmed. They sat in the same classrooms, learned the same advanced military strategies, read the same ancient books, and practiced the same deadly martial arts. Mehmed looked at Vlad as a brother, a companion, and a loyal future ally who would help him secure the borders of the empire. But while Mehmed was preparing to rule a global empire with law and justice, a dark, venomous hatred was quietly growing inside Vlad's mind. He did not spend his time in the palace just studying philosophy. He watched the Ottoman executioners closely. He studied their torture methods, analyzing how long a human body could survive under extreme pain. He became deeply fascinated by the slow, agonizing death caused by impalement, a method where a wooden stake was carefully driven through a person's body without piercing vital organs, keeping the victim alive and conscious for days. Vlad was not just a prisoner waiting for his freedom. He was a student of terror. He learned every single tactic of the Ottoman military. He knew their scout formations, their psychological vulnerabilities, their battle cries, and their defense mechanisms. He was the perfect weapon, trained by the Ottomans themselves, waiting for the perfect moment to strike them in the back. In the year 1456, Vlad finally returned to Wallachia and seized the throne with bloody hands. The young boy who had left the Ottoman palace had completely transformed into a cold-blooded psychopath. He immediately started a reign of terror that shocked even his closest allies and noblemen. Vlad despised criminals, beggars, and anyone he deemed useless to his society. He believed a strong state could only exist through absolute fear. One day he invited all the poor, the sick, and the elderly of his land to a massive, luxurious feast in a large wooden hall. They ate the finest meats, drank expensive wines, and cheered for their generous prince, believing their suffering was finally over. But as soon as the feast ended and the guests were full, Vlad quietly walked out. He ordered his elite guards to lock all the heavy wooden doors from the outside and barred the windows. He then ordered his men to set the entire building on fire. Hundreds of innocent people were burned alive, their screams echoing across the valley while Vlad watched from a safe distance, smiling. His official reason to the public was that he wanted to rid his country of poverty and ensure no one would be a burden to the state. But his deepest, most obsessive hatred was always directed at the Ottoman Empire. He wanted to prove that he was no longer the helpless hostage boy from the Edirne palace. When Sultan Mehmed sent his high-ranking envoys to Vlad's court to collect the annual tribute and maintain peace, the Ottoman diplomats refused to take off their turbans inside the throne room, as it was against their strict religious and imperial customs. Vlad's eyes narrowed and a cold, sadistic smile crawled across his face. He looked at the diplomats and told them, "If you love your turbans so much, and if your loyalty to your customs is so absolute, I will make sure they never leave your heads again." He gestured to his heavy guards. They grabbed the diplomats, pinned them to the wooden floor, and Vlad ordered iron spikes to be nailed directly through the turbans and into their skulls. This was not just a murder, it was an open, insulting declaration of total war against the man who had conquered the legendary walls of Constantinople. Vlad was daring the Sultan to come for him. When Sultan Mehmed received the news of the brutal, agonizing murder of his trusted diplomats, his fury was unmatched. The diplomatic insult demanded an overwhelming response. In the year 1462, the Sultan personally mounted his war horse and led a massive, unstoppable army of over 60,000 elite soldiers into the rugged lands of Wallachia to hunt Vlad down like a wild animal. As the massive Ottoman army advanced deeper into the territory, the bright sky began to change, and the air grew thick and heavy with the suffocating smell of rotting flesh. The soldiers covered their faces, but nothing could prepare them for what lay ahead. Suddenly, the vanguard stopped. Ahead of them stretched a horrific, surreal landscape that went on for over 2 miles. More than 20,000 Ottoman prisoners, soldiers, women, and children captured in previous border raids were hoisted high in the air on sharp, blood-stained wooden stakes. The crow-picked, blackened corpses swayed gently in the cold wind, creating a horrific, unnatural forest of the dead. The sight was so gruesome, so profoundly demonic, that even the most hardened Ottoman commanders, men who had survived countless bloody sieges, choked back tears and turned their eyes away. Vlad watched the army from the safety of the distant, misty mountains through his spyglass. He expected the Sultan's army to break down in terror, lose their morale, turn around, and flee back to Istanbul in absolute horror. He believed his psychological warfare had won him the war without swinging a single sword, but he severely underestimated the iron resolve of his childhood companion, Mehmed the Conqueror. The Sultan did not panic. He did not retreat. He rode his horse right to the very front of the line, looked directly at the horrific forest of death without blinking, and drew his heavy steel sword. He turned to his massive army, his voice echoing across the silent field of stakes, and shouted to his men that they were not fighting a mere king, but an absolute demon, and they would not rest, they would not sleep until his head was severed from his body. The soldiers raised their weapons, their fear instantly transforming into an explosive, burning desire for revenge. Realizing the Ottomans were marching right through his trap, Vlad grew desperate. He knew his smaller army could never survive a direct, open battlefield collision with the Sultan's main forces. He needed a miracle, an act of sheer madness, to shatter the Ottoman command structure. He decided he needed to assassinate the Sultan himself in the dead of night. On the pitch-black night of June 17th, 1462, Vlad executed one of the most daring and terrifying military maneuvers in history. Disguising himself and a small fanatical group of his elite soldiers in stolen Ottoman uniforms, and using his perfect knowledge of the Turkish language, which he had mastered during his years as a hostage, they slipped silently past the outer perimeter scouts. Once inside, they drew their hidden blades and launched a savage, chaotic, and incredibly bloody raid directly into the heart of the sleeping Ottoman camp. Swords clashed blindly in the dark, royal tents were set on fire, horses broke their ropes in panic, and terrifying screams filled the night air as soldiers killed each other in the confusion. Vlad fought like a man possessed by a devil, cutting through flesh and bone, moving desperately from tent to tent, searching for the grand golden royal tent of the Sultan to end the entire war with a single decisive strike to Mehmed's heart. But as he slashed his way closer to the center, he ran directly into an immovable wall of solid iron. The Sultan's personal guard, the Janissaries, the elite warriors known as the Crazy Turks, did not panic in the dark. These men were trained from early childhood to welcome death on the battlefield as the highest honor. They instantly formed an impenetrable, interlocking, defensive ring of shields and heavy armor around Sultan Mehmed. While the rest of the camp was in chaos, the Janissaries stood calm, their eyes cold. Armed with heavy battle axes and deadly scimitars, they surrounded Vlad's infiltrating forces in the dark and began a systematic, brutal slaughter. Realizing his assassination attempt had failed completely and that he was about to be cut to pieces, Vlad abandoned his loyal men, turned his horse around, and fled into the pitch-black depths of the surrounding forests like a coward, leaving thousands of his dead soldiers behind to face the Sultan's wrath. The infamous night attack was Vlad's last stand. The next morning, the Ottoman army completely crushed the remaining Wallachian forces, tearing down his strongholds and liberating the terrorized region. Vlad became a hunted, broken fugitive, running through the cold borders of Europe, begging foreign kings for hidden shelters, completely stripped of his crown, his grand army, and his terrifying power. For years he hid in the dark corners of history, a monster without a kingdom. Years later, in 1476, Vlad attempted to regain his lost throne one last time with a small band of mercenaries, but his luck had finally run out. He was ambushed in a dense forest. The man who had caused so much terror, who had smiled while spilling oceans of human blood, died face down, alone in a nameless, muddy field. But his dark story did not end with his death. The soldiers who discovered his corpse knew exactly what the Sultan had been waiting for all these years. They pulled out a heavy blade and decapitated Vlad Tepes to ensure the entire world knew the psychological monster was truly dead and could never return. His severed head was carefully preserved in a large jar of sweet, thick honey to prevent any natural decay during the long journey. It was carried across hundreds of miles of rugged terrain all the way back to the grand gates of Istanbul. There, in front of the massive crowd gathered outside the imperial palace, Fatih Sultan Mehmed ordered Dracula's head to be taken out of the jar and displayed high up on a sharp wooden spike for everyone to see. It was the exact same execution method Vlad had used to terrorize the world, turned against him as a final, ironic act of justice. The historical nightmare that had paralyzed Europe was finally over. The real vampire of Wallachia was defeated, not by holy water, not by wooden stakes through the heart, and not by silver bullets, but by the relentless, unyielding steel of the Ottoman Empire and the fearless warriors who refused to bow to fear. Today, the world remembers him as a creature of folklore, a caped aristocrat drinking wine in a castle. But history remembers the truth. History remembers the exact night the self-proclaimed King of Darkness ran away into the woods, terrified by the shadows of the Janissaries, leaving his dark legacy to be crushed under the boots of the ultimate conqueror.